It was a quiet afternoon in a small community hall. The sunlight filtered through tall windows, painting the wooden floor with warm gold. A few people were scattered across the room, some sitting on chairs, others leaning against the walls, chatting quietly. In the corner, an old grand piano stood, polished but slightly worn with age. Its keys gleamed under the sunlight, waiting for someone to bring them to life. Among the people in the room was a young woman who usually kept to herself. She had always loved music, but she never sought attention. Her friends often joked that she could play the piano without even looking at her hands, and yet she had never performed in front of a crowd bigger than her family. Today, she was only here because her mother had insisted. It was a small gathering to celebrate a local music event, and she was invited to watch. She wasn't nervous. She just thought it would be nice to enjoy some music, maybe hear a few talented people play, and then go home. As she moved closer to the piano, she noticed the other performers warming up. Some were practicing scales, their fingers moving quickly across the keys. Others were tuning their instruments or flipping through sheet music. She felt a familiar pull in her chest, the quiet excitement that always came before a piano performance. She didn't think she would play. She had no plan to. She just wanted to sit quietly and enjoy the music. But then something unexpected happened. The organizer of the event, a kind but slightly impatient woman in her 50s, noticed her near the piano. "Hey!" she called, her voice warm but direct. "Would you mind sitting at the piano and playing a simple note for us? Just something small. We don't need anything complicated." The young woman froze for a moment. A simple note? She looked at the organizer, unsure whether she had heard correctly. She had never been asked to perform in front of strangers before, and suddenly the thought of playing even a single note felt both thrilling and terrifying. She shook her head slightly, almost instinctively, but before she could reply, the organizer smiled encouragingly. "It's okay," she said. "Just a little something. Nothing fancy. Everyone will appreciate it." The young woman took a deep breath. She had always believed that music should be felt, not shown off. But now, with all eyes turning toward her, she felt something stir inside. She approached the piano slowly, each step heavy with a mixture of fear and anticipation. She touched the keys lightly at first, her fingers brushing the surface as if testing whether the piano was ready for her touch. The room fell silent. Even the whispers and shuffling of feet seemed to pause, as though the air itself was waiting. She sat down, her hands hovering above the keys. For a moment, she felt the weight of expectation pressing down on her. She was just supposed to play a simple note, yet her mind raced with possibilities. Could she play something small but beautiful? Could she let her emotions show without overdoing it? She reminded herself to breathe. One note, one small sound, nothing more. Then she pressed the key. The note sounded clear and bright. The room seemed to hold its breath. It was a simple note, as requested, but even in that single tone, there was a hint of something more. A quiet elegance that was hard to describe. Some people smiled softly, thinking it was just a good start. Others, who listened more closely, sensed a depth that they could not quite explain. The young woman hesitated for a moment. The simple note had been played, but now she felt a strange curiosity. What if she allowed herself to play just a little more? What if she let her fingers wander and see where the music took her? Her heart beat faster at the thought. She had never performed like this in front of strangers, but something inside told her that she could do it. That maybe, just maybe, she could give them a small glimpse of what she felt when she played alone in her room at home. She pressed another key, then another. The sound started to flow more naturally now. The room was quiet, the audience watching with polite attention. But as the notes continued, something shifted. The music was no longer just a simple note. It was soft, delicate, and yet full of emotion. Her fingers moved across the keys with ease, almost as if they had a life of their own. She didn't need to think about each note. She only needed to feel it. And that feeling, pure, unfiltered, and real, was what made the music extraordinary. Some in the audience began to lean forward in their seats, noticing how her hands moved so gracefully. Others exchanged quiet glances, sensing that this was no ordinary performance. A few whispered to each other, asking if she had studied at a music school or trained with a famous teacher. But no one had an answer. They only knew that what they were hearing was special, even if they couldn't yet explain why. The young woman herself was surprised. She had not planned to play more than one note, and yet here she was, creating something that felt alive and powerful. Each chord she struck seemed to echo her thoughts, her emotions, and her quiet determination. She had always loved music, but she had never realized just how much she could express through it. The room was her canvas, the piano her brush, and she painted a picture that no one could see but everyone could feel. Minutes passed, though it felt like only a heartbeat. The simple request had transformed into a gentle exploration of sound and emotion. Every note was deliberate yet natural, like a conversation between her and the piano. She was no longer playing for the audience. She was playing for herself, letting the music tell the story she had kept inside for so long. When she finally paused, there was a moment of silence. The kind that happens when people are too stunned to react immediately. The audience looked around, unsure if they should clap or simply sit in awe. Then, slowly, applause began to ripple through the room. Not just polite clapping, but genuine, heartfelt appreciation. Some people stood up, moved by the unexpected depth of her performance. Others whispered her name, asking who she was and how she had learned to play like that. The young woman looked up, a small smile on her face. She felt a mixture of relief and quiet pride. She had only been asked for a simple note, and yet she had given them so much more. It wasn't about impressing anyone or showing off. It was about letting the music speak for her. And in that moment, she realized that sometimes, the smallest request could lead to the greatest expression of who you truly were. After the applause died down, the organizer approached her, eyes wide with amazement. "That was incredible," she said, almost breathless. "I only asked for a single note, and instead you delivered something magical. Everyone here is talking about it." The young woman simply nodded, still feeling the thrill of the music echoing in her chest. She didn't need to explain herself. The piano had spoken, and the audience had understood. She knew that this moment would stay with her forever, a reminder that talent and passion could shine even when no one expected it. Later, as people started to leave the hall, some stopped to ask her more questions. Some just smiled at her in admiration. She walked away from the piano slowly, her hands still tingling from the music she had played. She had always loved the piano, but now she felt a new connection to it, a deeper understanding of how powerful music could be. That afternoon, a simple request had turned into something extraordinary. The young woman had stepped into the piano not knowing what would happen, and she had left an impression that no one in that room would ever forget. It was a small beginning, but it felt like the start of something much bigger. She had learned something important about herself too, that even in quiet moments, even when expectations were low, the heart could speak in ways that words never could. And so, with the sound of applause still ringing softly in her ears, she stepped out into the sunlight, carrying with her the feeling of a small note that had blossomed into a masterpiece. After the applause settled, the young woman felt a mixture of relief and excitement. Her heart was still racing, and her hands tingled from the way the piano had seemed to respond to her touch. She had expected to play just a small note, maybe something polite and simple. She had not imagined that her music could hold anyone's attention so fully. The experience left her both amazed and nervous at the same time. People around her were still talking quietly, exchanging surprised looks and whispers. Some came closer to get a better glimpse of her, curious about the person behind the piano that had captured their attention. "Who is she?" one person asked softly to another. "Has she been performing somewhere before?" They were all trying to understand how someone so young and seemingly ordinary could play with such skill and emotion. The organizer, still smiling, came over and placed a hand lightly on her shoulder. "That was truly unexpected," she said warmly. "We thought it would be just a single note, but you've given everyone something they will remember for a long time. People are asking if you will play again, even if it's just a little piece." The young woman hesitated. She hadn't planned to play anymore, but the thought of returning to the piano didn't frighten her now. In fact, a quiet excitement grew inside her. She had always loved music, but she had never imagined that playing it in front of others could feel this powerful. It was one thing to play alone in her room at home, and another to hear how the notes traveled through a room filled with people, touching them in ways she couldn't fully explain. With a small nod, she agreed. "I can play a little more," she said softly. The organizer's eyes lit up, and a few others nearby glanced at each other in surprise. It was clear that everyone expected something small and simple, but something told them that this young woman might have more to show. She walked back to the piano, the polished surface reflecting her hands as she rested them gently on the keys. The room had grown quieter now, as if everyone had paused to wait for what would come next. She closed her eyes for a moment, feeling the energy of the room and taking a deep breath. Then she began to play. This time, the music was different from the first simple note. It flowed naturally, like water moving through a stream. She didn't need to think about each key. Her fingers knew where to go. The melodies were soft at first, almost shy, but as she continued, they grew bolder. Each note carried emotion: hope, joy, sadness, and wonder. It was as if the piano itself had become a part of her, helping her tell a story without words. Some people in the audience started to lean forward, unable to stop themselves. Others closed their eyes, letting the music wash over them. It was not just beautiful, it was captivating. The young woman could feel it too. The piano seemed alive under her touch, responding to her emotions and guiding her through each passage. She had never felt anything like it before. Playing alone had always been comforting, but playing in this room, with these people listening, gave her music a new life. A few of the attendees whispered to each other. "She's amazing," one said quietly. "I didn't expect that from her. She makes it feel so natural, so effortless." Another added, "I've heard many performers, but this is different. There's something real about it." Even those who had not been interested in music before seemed drawn in. The notes reached them, stirred feelings, and captured their imagination. As she played, the young woman began to improvise. She experimented with rhythms and chords, blending them together in ways that felt right to her. She didn't worry about making a mistake. There was no pressure to perform perfectly. Instead, she allowed herself to explore the music freely. With each variation, the room grew more still, as if everyone had been pulled into the story she was telling through sound. Time seemed to stretch. What felt like a few minutes might have been much longer, but she didn't notice. She was lost in the music, in the way her hands danced over the keys and the way the melodies rose and fell like waves. She had always known that music could express what words could not, but now she truly understood the power it held. Each chord carried a feeling, and each note seemed to reach directly into the hearts of those listening. People around her began to react in small ways. Some smiled softly, recognizing the emotions she expressed. Others wiped their eyes quietly, moved by the depth and beauty of her playing. There was a sense of connection in the room, a shared understanding between the pianist and her audience that went beyond anything spoken. It was an unspoken communication, carried only through sound. One woman in the front row leaned toward her friend and whispered, "It's like she's telling her story without words. You can feel every moment she's lived." Another man nodded, unable to look away from the movement of her hands. "She's not just playing notes. She's playing feelings, memories, everything." The young woman continued, encouraged by the response. She had never considered herself a performer. She had always thought of her music as something private, something personal. But now she realized that sharing it, even just a little, could bring people together in a way she had never imagined. The music was no longer just for her. It belonged to everyone in the room for as long as the notes lingered in their hearts. She reached a particularly emotional passage and paused briefly, letting the silence hang in the air. It was a soft, gentle moment, a contrast to the flowing melodies that had come before. In that pause, she felt the weight of the room's attention, but instead of fear, she felt warmth and support. The audience was not judging her. They were listening, truly listening. They were ready to follow her wherever her music would take them. Then she resumed, and the music rose once more. Her fingers moved faster now, but with control, weaving together layers of sound that were both intricate and harmonious. The piano seemed to respond to her touch in a way that made the room vibrate with life. Even those who had never cared much about piano music found themselves drawn into the sound, captivated by the rhythm and emotion she created. She played a section that was particularly joyful, letting the music feel light and carefree. Some people in the audience laughed softly, unable to contain their delight. The music was playful, yet precise, a reflection of her skill and imagination. It was clear that she was not just talented, but passionate. Every note carried her personality, her love for music, and her willingness to take risks. As the piece continued, she began to combine different styles, blending gentle, melodic passages with strong, dramatic chords. The music became a journey, full of twists and turns, emotions rising and falling like the tide. The audience was mesmerized, following each change, caught in the story she was telling through sound. By the time she reached the final notes, there was an energy in the room that had not been there before. People were leaning forward, their faces bright with amazement. They could see and feel that something extraordinary had happened, something that went far beyond a simple note. The young woman pressed the last key, and the sound lingered in the air, fading slowly like a memory that refuses to be forgotten. For a moment there was silence. No one moved. The audience seemed unable to process what they had just experienced. Then, gradually, applause began to build, soft at first, then louder and louder, until the entire room was clapping, cheering, and shouting praise. Some stood up, moved by the performance, unable to contain their admiration. The young woman smiled, feeling a warmth she had never experienced before. She had not planned for this, and yet it felt perfect. The organizer came forward once more, her eyes shining. "I don't know what to say," she said. "Everyone thought it would be simple. No one expected this. You've given us a performance we will never forget." The young woman nodded, her heart still racing, and quietly thanked her. She didn't need to explain herself. The music had spoken, and that was enough. Afterwards, people came up to talk to her, to ask about her background, her training, and how she had learned to play with such skill. She answered politely but simply, not wanting to boast. She explained that she had always loved music and practiced often, but she had never performed in front of anyone outside her family before. Their surprise and admiration only grew, and some even encouraged her to perform more often. As the crowd began to leave, she realized that the simple request for a single note had opened a door she had never considered stepping through. She had discovered something powerful about herself, something that had been waiting quietly, ready to be shared. The music had given her courage, confidence, and a sense of connection to others that she had never experienced before. Walking out of the hall that afternoon, she carried with her the memory of the room, the people, and the music she had created. She had started with a single note, but she had given them something much greater, a piece of her heart expressed through the piano. And in that moment, she understood that even the smallest opportunities could lead to moments of wonder, if only one had the courage to take them. The young woman knew that this was only the beginning. She had felt the magic of sharing her music, and she knew that there would be more moments like this, moments where she could surprise herself and others with the power of her talent. The day had started quietly, with nothing more than a polite request, and yet it had ended with a performance that would linger in everyone's memory. As she walked home in the fading sunlight, she thought about how unexpected life could be. Sometimes even the simplest request could lead to something extraordinary. And for her, the piano was no longer just a hobby or a secret passion. It had become a bridge between her and the world, a way to show who she really was without saying a single word. After that afternoon, the young woman could not stop thinking about what had happened. The applause, the whispers, the looks of surprise and admiration. It all stayed in her mind like a melody that refused to fade. For the first time, she realized that her music could touch people beyond her small room at home, beyond her family, beyond the quiet practice she had always kept to herself. It was a strange feeling, both exciting and a little frightening, because it opened a door she had never stepped through before. The next day, she found herself drawn back to the piano. It was almost like the instrument had called her, asking her to return. She remembered how her hands had felt that day, moving almost without thought, responding to the music as if it were alive. She sat down, hesitated for a moment, and then began to play. The notes came gently at first, familiar patterns she had practiced hundreds of times, but then they began to change. Her fingers wandered, creating new melodies, combining rhythms in ways she had never tried before. She noticed how different it felt to play with the memory of the audience in her mind. There was a kind of energy she could not explain. It was not fear, but it was awareness. She imagined the people who had listened so attentively, the expressions on their faces, and she felt a desire to capture that same magic again. The music flowed more freely now, more confidently. Every chord, every note seemed to carry emotion, like a story being told through sound. She realized she was learning something new about herself every time she touched the keys. Meanwhile, news of her unexpected performance began to spread. A few people from the gathering had told their friends about the young woman who had started with a single note and ended with a piano masterpiece. Their words were full of awe and curiosity. People began to ask if she would play again, not just for fun, but for events, small concerts, or even just for neighbors who wanted to hear her music. Though she had never considered performing seriously, she felt a quiet pull toward sharing more of her gift. The young woman's family noticed the change in her as well. She spent more time at the piano, exploring new pieces and experimenting with her own compositions. Her parents were supportive but careful not to pressure her. They could see that she was discovering something important about herself, something that gave her both joy and purpose. At the same time, they reminded her to stay balanced, to enjoy music for herself and not just for others' approval. She listened and nodded, understanding that the balance between personal happiness and public attention would be important. One afternoon, a friend from the gathering approached her. "You were amazing yesterday," they said, eyes wide with admiration. "I've never seen anyone play like that. You didn't just hit the keys, you told a story. Do you think you could play for our school's music program next week? Everyone would love to hear you." The young woman hesitated. Performing in front of her school would be very different from the small community hall. The audience would be bigger, and she would feel more pressure to play perfectly. But she also felt a thrill, a curiosity about what it would be like to reach even more people. After thinking for a moment, she agreed. "I'll try," she said softly, not wanting to promise too much. Over the next few days, she practiced more than ever before. Not just the pieces she had learned, but her own improvisations and small compositions. She experimented with different tempos, tried combining soft and loud sections, and explored new ways to make the piano speak as she felt it in her heart. She realized that performing was not just about playing notes correctly. It was about connecting with the listeners, letting them feel her story through the music. When the day of the school music program arrived, she was nervous, more than she had been at the community hall. The auditorium was filled with students, teachers, and parents, all chatting and laughing before the program began. She waited backstage, hands lightly brushing the piano keys in her mind, imagining how it would feel when she finally sat down to play. Her heart beat quickly, but she reminded herself to breathe. She had done this before, she thought. She could do it again. Finally, it was her turn. She walked onto the stage slowly, her eyes scanning the audience. Some faces were familiar, but most were strangers. The lights were brighter here, and the room was much larger than the community hall. She felt a small flutter of fear, but also a quiet excitement. She took her seat at the piano, fingers resting on the keys, and closed her eyes. The first notes were soft, almost hesitant, but as her confidence grew, the music began to flow naturally. She played with feeling, letting her hands follow the emotions inside her rather than thinking about the technical aspects. She could hear the audience quieting, listening intently. Some leaned forward, others closed their eyes, and she realized that she was once again telling a story with her music. As she continued, She experimented with new melodies, combining gentle harmonies with strong, dramatic chords. She added small flourishes and delicate trills, allowing her fingers to explore the piano in ways she had never done before. The audience seemed captivated, following her music closely, reacting naturally to the shifts in mood and tempo. She could feel their attention, and it encouraged her to play with even more expression and depth. At one point, she played a passage that was particularly emotional, a sequence of notes that seemed to float in the air, touching something deep in the hearts of the listeners. She had never performed this piece for anyone, not even herself. It was a feeling she had kept inside, a mixture of joy, longing, and quiet hope, and now it was being shared through the piano. Some people were moved to tears, while others smiled softly, as if understanding something unspoken. After a few minutes, she transitioned into a lively, playful section. The music felt bright and cheerful, almost like sunlight dancing across a field. The audience responded with quiet laughter and delighted murmurs. Even those who had never been interested in piano music before seemed caught up in the performance. She could see the expressions on their faces, the way they leaned forward, the sparkle in their eyes. It was as if her music had brought them together, even for just a short while, in a shared moment of wonder. She ended the performance with a gentle, lingering chord that filled the auditorium and then faded slowly. For a brief moment, there was complete silence. The audience seemed frozen, as if trying to hold onto the feeling of the music before letting it go. Then the applause erupted, loud and heartfelt. People stood up, clapping and cheering, some shouting words of praise. She smiled quietly, feeling the same warmth she had felt at the community hall, but even stronger this time. Afterwards, teachers and students came forward to congratulate her. Some asked about her practice routine, others asked how long she had been playing. She answered politely, keeping her responses simple, not wanting to boast. She explained that she had always loved music and had practiced privately, but performing in front of others was new to her. The admiration she received was humbling, and it made her realize how much her music could connect with others. Over the following weeks, invitations to perform began to come in more regularly. Local events, school programs, and small concerts asked for her presence. She began to understand that her music could reach more people than she had ever imagined, and with that understanding came a new sense of responsibility. It was no longer just about playing for herself. It was about sharing the joy and emotion she felt through music with anyone willing to listen. She also noticed how much her own confidence had grown. The young woman who had once been shy and hesitant about performing in front of others was now learning to embrace the attention. She realized that performing did not have to be scary or stressful. When she focused on the music and the story she wanted to tell, everything else faded away. The piano became a partner, a friend, and a way to express the feelings she sometimes struggled to put into words. At home, she continued to practice daily, exploring new pieces and experimenting with her own compositions. She found joy not just in performing for others, but also in discovering new ways to make the piano speak. Sometimes she would play quietly in her room, imagining the audience she had touched with her music, thinking about how each note had carried emotion and meaning. Other times, she would rehearse more formally, preparing for upcoming performances. Each day, she felt her skill and confidence grow a little more. She began to notice how music affected not just her, but everyone around her. Friends and family would pause when she played, listening closely, sometimes commenting on how moved they were. Even strangers, when invited to small gatherings, would stop and marvel at her ability to make the piano tell a story. She realized that the power of music was not just in the notes themselves, but in the way it connected people, bridged emotions, and created shared experiences. As time went on, the young woman's reputation quietly grew. She was no longer just the person who had played a single note at a community hall. She was someone who could make a piano come alive, someone whose music could inspire and move others. But she never let this attention change who she was. She remained humble, focused on the joy of playing, and committed to letting the music guide her rather than chasing fame or recognition. Through all of this, she learned an important lesson. Talent is a gift, but courage is what allows it to shine. She had been asked for a simple note, and she had delivered something extraordinary, not because she wanted to impress anyone, but because she allowed herself to follow her passion. And in that choice, she discovered not only her own potential but also the joy of sharing it with the world. After the school performance, word of the young woman's talent began to spread more quickly than she had expected. It started quietly, with a few classmates telling their friends, then teachers mentioning her in passing, and soon, even people she didn't know were asking to hear her play. She had always enjoyed music for herself, quietly and privately, but now she was beginning to understand that her gift could reach far beyond her own small world. At first, she felt a mix of excitement and nervousness. The attention was flattering, yes, but it was also unfamiliar. She had never thought of herself as someone who could perform for large audiences or become known for her skill. Performing had always been personal, a way to express her feelings when words were not enough. But now, people were looking at her differently, expecting her to deliver something extraordinary every time she sat at the piano. One day, she received an invitation to perform at a larger local event. This time, it wasn't just a school program or a small community gathering. It was a concert with families, neighbors, and even some local officials in attendance. The organizers had heard about her earlier performances and wanted her to play. She felt a flutter in her chest as she read the invitation. She knew that playing in front of so many people would be more challenging, but she also felt a quiet excitement. This was a chance to explore how far her music could reach. On the day of the event, the hall was larger than any she had played in before. Rows of chairs stretched far back, and the audience filled them with eager anticipation. The air buzzed with conversations, laughter, and the rustle of programs. She waited backstage, hands brushing lightly over her skirt, as she tried to calm her racing heart. She had played before, yes, but this felt different. The stakes seemed higher. The audience seemed larger. She was not just performing a piece. She was sharing a part of herself with everyone in that room. When her turn arrived, she walked to the piano, feeling the smooth wood beneath her fingers. She took a deep breath, sat down, and let her hands hover over the keys. For a moment, everything seemed to freeze. The lights, the chatter, even the faint hum of the air around her. Then, she pressed the first note. It rang out clearly and confidently, filling the hall with sound. The audience quieted immediately. What began as a simple melody quickly developed into something more intricate and expressive. She played with emotion, letting each chord, each note, carry a story. Her hands moved with precision and fluidity, but also with feeling, as if the piano itself understood her intentions. People in the audience leaned forward in their seats, captivated by the performance. Some closed their eyes, letting the music wash over them, while others simply stared, amazed by what they were hearing. She could feel the room's energy in a way she had never experienced before. It wasn't just about playing the correct notes. It was about conveying emotion, sharing something deeply personal through the piano. The music rose and fell, soft and gentle at times, powerful and dramatic at others. She allowed herself to explore improvisation, blending familiar melodies with her own creations. The audience seemed to follow her wherever she went, held by the story she told through sound. As she reached a particularly dramatic section, she noticed something she hadn't expected. Some members of the audience were visibly moved. One person wiped a tear from their eye. Another leaned toward a friend, whispering softly, and a few others sat in complete silence, entirely absorbed. She realized that her music had the power to affect people in ways she had never imagined. The piano was no longer just an instrument. It was a bridge, connecting her emotions to those of the audience. In the middle of her performance, she made a small improvisational shift. A sequence of chords that she had never tried before flowed naturally under her fingers. It was bold and unexpected, but it felt right. The hall seemed to respond instantly. The audience leaned in, reacting instinctively to the new sound. She realized then that music could be a conversation, a give and take between performer and listener. Every note she played elicited a reaction, and every reaction guided her next movement. As she continued, she became more confident. Her earlier nervousness had vanished, replaced by a sense of connection and purpose. She felt the music coursing through her, a living thing that carried meaning and emotion. The audience was no longer separate from her. They were part of the performance, part of the story she was telling. She could see their expressions, feel their engagement, and it inspired her to play even more fully. Toward the end of her performance, she played a section that was slow and gentle, almost like a whisper. It was the kind of music that invited reflection, that allowed the listener to pause and feel something deeply. The audience responded instinctively, quietly, respectfully, completely absorbed in the sound. She had created a space in that hall where people could experience emotion, simply by listening. It was a strange and wonderful feeling, to know that something she had created could have such an effect. Then, she transitioned into a lively, energetic section, full of playful rhythms and bright, sparkling notes. The audience reacted with delight. Some smiled widely, others clapped softly along with the rhythm, and a few even laughed quietly at the joy in the music. It was as if the piano had transformed the entire room, bringing everyone together in a shared moment of emotion and energy. She felt a rush of happiness, knowing that she had the power to inspire such a response. When she finally reached the last note, she held it just long enough for the sound to linger, then let it fade naturally. The hall remained quiet for a moment, as if everyone wanted to savor the final echo of her music. Then, the applause erupted. It was loud, warm, and heartfelt. People stood up, cheering, clapping, and calling out their admiration. She smiled softly, feeling a deep sense of satisfaction and connection. After the performance, many approached her to express their surprise and admiration. Teachers, neighbors, and even strangers asked how she had learned to play with such skill and emotion. She answered politely but simply, not wanting to exaggerate. She explained that she had always loved music and had practiced quietly, but she had never performed in front of large audiences before. Their amazement only grew, and some encouraged her to consider performing more often, maybe even pursuing a professional path. Despite the praise and attention, she remained humble. She understood that talent alone was not enough. It was the combination of passion, dedication, and willingness to share that had created this extraordinary experience. She realized that performing was not just about showing skill. It was about connecting with people, sharing a part of herself, and creating moments that could touch hearts. In the days that followed, she reflected on the performance constantly. She replayed the music in her mind, remembering the expressions on the faces of the audience, the way the notes had flowed, and the energy that had moved through the room. She began to understand that her gift was not just a personal talent, but a way to connect with the world around her. Music had become a language she could use to communicate feelings that words could never fully capture. She also began to experiment more boldly. At home, she tried combining different styles, creating her own compositions, and improvising without worrying about mistakes. Each time she played, she learned something new, about the piano, about music, and about herself. She realized that the true power of her gift lay not in perfection, but in expression. The more she allowed herself to explore and take risks, the more her music resonated with others. Slowly, she began to understand the broader impact of what she could do. She had started with a single note, then a small improvisation, and now full performances that moved entire audiences. Each experience reinforced the idea that music could touch people deeply, even without words. She felt a responsibility to continue sharing her talent, not for recognition, but to bring joy, comfort, and inspiration to those who heard it. Her family noticed the change in her as well. They could see that she had grown in confidence and self-assurance. She walked taller, spoke more openly about her music, and smiled more often. They encouraged her gently, supporting her as she explored new opportunities to perform. They reminded her to stay grounded, to play for the love of music rather than for applause, and she listened carefully, understanding the wisdom in their words. At the same time, her friends and classmates became increasingly curious about her skill. Some asked to watch her practice, others asked her to teach them small pieces, and a few simply wanted to sit quietly and listen as she played. She welcomed this attention, not as a way to show off, but as a chance to share something she loved with others. Each time she played for someone, she felt the same connection she had first experienced in that community hall. The understanding that music could bring people together in a quiet, unspoken way. She also noticed how her music could inspire confidence in others. Some students who had never played an instrument began to try, encouraged by her example. Others who had been shy about performing found courage in her story. She realized that her talent was not just a gift for herself. It could inspire and empower others, showing them that passion, dedication, and courage could create extraordinary moments. Through it all, she remained humble and thoughtful. She understood that talent alone was not enough to create meaningful music. It required heart, patience, and a willingness to connect. Every note she played was an opportunity to express something real, to touch someone else's life, even in a small way. She treasured that responsibility and approached each performance with care, knowing that her music had the power to leave a lasting impression. By the end of the season, she had performed multiple times, each event larger and more engaging than the last. People began to recognize her in the community, not just as a talented pianist, but as someone who could create moments of beauty and emotion through music. Yet she remained the same quiet, thoughtful young woman she had always been, only now with the confidence to share her gift with the world. And through it all, she remembered the first simple note she had been asked to play. That small request had set everything into motion. What had started as something ordinary had transformed into something extraordinary. She had discovered not only her talent, but also the joy of sharing it, the power of connecting with others, and the beauty of letting music speak for itself. Weeks had passed since the young woman's last performance, and her music was slowly becoming known in her town. People talked about the girl who had started with a simple note and had turned it into something extraordinary. Invitations to perform were increasing, and with each one, her confidence grew. But she remained careful and humble. Music was always personal for her. Performing was not about attention. It was about sharing what she felt inside. One morning, she received a message from a local event organizer. It was a prestigious event that gathered people from nearby towns, students, teachers, musicians, and families. The organizer's words were clear. They wanted her to perform, and they expected something special. Her heart skipped a beat as she read it. This was larger than anything she had done before, and the thought of performing in front of a bigger audience both thrilled and frightened her. She wondered if she was ready. Her parents noticed her quiet excitement and concern. They reminded her to focus on the music itself, not the audience. "Play for yourself first," her mother said gently. "If you enjoy it, they will feel it too." She nodded, taking in the advice, and spent the next few days preparing. But this time, she did more than practice the usual pieces. She explored new ideas, experimented with rhythms, and improvised in ways she had never done before. The piano became not just an instrument, but a friend, guiding her fingers and her emotions. When the day arrived, she entered the hall where the event was held. The room was filled with hundreds of people, far more than she had ever seen before. The stage was elevated, and bright lights shone down, making her momentarily nervous. She took a deep breath, feeling the familiar flutter of anticipation in her chest. She reminded herself to focus on the music, to let her emotions guide her, and not to worry about the audience. She had done it before. She could do it again. As she walked to the piano, she noticed the expressions of the people in the audience. There was curiosity, expectation, and a faint undercurrent of doubt. They had heard stories about her talent, but few had seen her perform live. Some were whispering, trying to guess what she would play. She felt the pressure, but she also felt a quiet determination. She had something to share, something that could not be measured by size or reputation. It was music from her heart. She sat down and rested her fingers lightly on the keys. The hall went quiet, waiting for the first note. She closed her eyes for a moment, letting the silence fill her with calm. Then, she pressed the first key. The note echoed clearly, filling the space, and a hush fell over the audience. This was more than just a beginning. It was a signal that something special was about to happen. The music started gently, almost like a soft breeze. She played with care, letting the notes flow naturally. As the melody continued, it grew more expressive, more complex. She added subtle variations, small flourishes that were completely her own. The audience leaned in, sensing that this was not a routine performance. Even those who had never cared much for piano music found themselves drawn in, curious and captivated. As she progressed, her music became more powerful. She blended gentle, lyrical passages with strong, dramatic chords. She explored emotions she had never played openly before: joy, longing, hope, and even sorrow. Each note was deliberate, yet natural, carrying the story she wanted to tell. The audience could feel it. Some smiled softly, touched by the beauty of the melody. Others had tears in their eyes, moved by the depth of the music. She reached a section that was entirely improvised. It was bold, daring, and completely unexpected. Her fingers flew over the keys, creating harmonies that were complex but perfectly balanced. The hall seemed to respond instantly. People leaned forward, wide-eyed, whispering softly in amazement. The music was alive, flowing between her and the audience, a silent conversation full of emotion and meaning. She felt exhilarated. The piano was no longer just an instrument. It was an extension of herself, expressing what words could never capture. As the piece continued, she allowed herself to take risks. She combined contrasting elements, gentle melodies with rapid runs, soft chords with bold, dramatic passages. Each transition was seamless, as if the piano and she were in perfect harmony. The audience was completely absorbed, caught in the story she was telling through sound. They weren't just listening. They were experiencing the music with her, feeling each note in a way that was both personal and universal. Somewhere in the middle of the performance, she played a passage that took her completely by surprise. It was an idea she had never tried before, a spontaneous creation that seemed to flow naturally from her fingers. The hall responded immediately. Gasps and soft murmurs of admiration rippled through the crowd. She realized then that music was more than skill. It was emotion, courage, and trust. She had trusted herself to follow her instincts, and the result was something extraordinary. By the time she reached the final section, the music had built to a crescendo. Powerful chords resonated through the hall, each one carrying energy, emotion, and life. Her hands moved with precision, speed, and grace, but also with a deep emotional connection. The audience could feel it. Some held their breath, anticipating the final note. Others leaned forward, unable to stop themselves from becoming fully immersed. The music was intense, moving, and unforgettable. Then came the last note. She pressed it firmly, letting it linger, then slowly released it. Silence filled the hall for a heartbeat, and then applause erupted. The sound was thunderous, warm, and genuine. People stood up, cheering and clapping, some calling out their admiration. Tears glistened in a few eyes, while smiles of awe spread across faces. She felt a mixture of relief, joy, and pride, knowing that she had shared something truly special. After the applause, people rushed to her, asking about her music, how she had learned to play with such emotion, and how she had created something so unexpected. Teachers, musicians, and even strangers praised her skill and creativity. She answered humbly, explaining that she had practiced for years, always focusing on music for herself first, but that performing had taught her something new, that music could connect people, touch hearts, and leave lasting impressions. The organizer of the event approached her, eyes wide with amazement. "I didn't know what to expect," they said. "We asked you to perform, and instead, you gave us something unforgettable. Everyone here is talking about it. You didn't just play notes. You created an experience." She smiled quietly, feeling a sense of fulfillment she had never known. It wasn't just about recognition. It was about the joy of sharing her music and seeing the effect it had on others. In the days that followed, she received even more invitations to perform. Small concerts, school events, and local gatherings all asked for her presence. She began to see herself not just as someone who loved music, but as someone who could inspire others with it. She still practiced quietly at home, exploring new pieces and improvising, but now she also prepared for audiences, learning how to convey emotion effectively and connect with listeners in a meaningful way. She noticed how much her own confidence had grown. She could walk onto a stage without fear, sit at the piano, and let her music flow naturally. She had learned to trust herself, to trust the piano, and to trust that the audience would respond to sincerity and passion. Performing had become a way to communicate, to share her feelings, and to make people feel something profound without speaking a single word. Friends and family were amazed at her growth. They could see how much more confident she had become, how her posture and presence had changed, and how deeply she connected with her music. They supported her, encouraging her to continue performing, but always reminding her to stay true to herself and to play for the love of music, not just for applause. She listened carefully, understanding that balance was important. Even strangers were beginning to recognize her. At local shops, schools, and events, people would ask if she was the girl who played the piano. Some would ask to hear her perform, and a few even asked for lessons or guidance. She welcomed these requests with humility, happy to share her experience and passion with anyone willing to listen. She realized that her talent had the power not only to entertain, but also to inspire, encourage, and teach. Through all of this, she never lost sight of the first note she had been asked to play. That single note had started everything. It had led her to discover her own potential, to understand the power of music, and to connect with others in ways she had never imagined. She often thought about that moment, realizing how much could happen from something so simple. It reminded her to stay humble, to remain curious, and to always let her heart guide her music. The young woman also began to understand the responsibility that came with her talent. Music was a gift, but it was also a way to make a difference. Every performance had the potential to inspire, comfort, or move someone in a meaningful way. She approached each opportunity with care, preparing thoroughly, but also allowing her heart and instincts to guide her. It was this balance that made her performances so powerful, so real, and so unforgettable. By the end of that season, she had performed multiple times, each audience larger and more engaged than the last. People were talking about her in the community, praising her skill, her emotion, and the way she could make the piano sing in ways they had never imagined. And yet, she remained grounded, focused on the joy of playing and the connection she could create through music. Through it all, she realized that the journey was just beginning. Her music had already touched many people, but she knew there were countless opportunities ahead. Opportunities to perform, to explore, to grow, and to inspire. And she was ready. She had learned that courage, passion, and sincerity could turn even the simplest note into something unforgettable. And she was determined to continue sharing that gift with the world. Months had passed since the young woman had first been asked for a simple note. That small request had set off a chain of events that she could never have imagined. Each performance, each audience, and each reaction had shaped her in ways she was only beginning to understand. Her music had become more than just a hobby. It was a part of her identity, a way to communicate her feelings and connect with others on a level words could never reach. One afternoon, she received an invitation that made her heart race with anticipation. It was from a regional music festival, known for gathering talented musicians from several towns and cities. The organizers had heard about her previous performances and wanted her to play. This was a much larger stage with people who were skilled, knowledgeable, and expecting excellence. The thought of performing there made her both nervous and excited. She realized this would be a true test of her growth, her courage, and her ability to share her music under pressure. She spent days preparing, practicing not just the technical pieces, but also improvisations that reflected her personal style. She experimented with timing, dynamics, and emotional expression, pushing herself to explore the full range of her abilities. She wanted the music to tell her story, to touch the hearts of everyone listening, and to leave an impression they would not forget. Each note she played felt like a step forward, a way to understand herself more deeply. The day of the festival arrived. The auditorium was grander than any she had performed in before, with rows of seats stretching farther than she could see. Cameras and microphones were set up, and there was a palpable excitement in the air. Musicians from different towns rehearsed on the stage, some tuning their instruments, others practicing quietly. She watched them, feeling a mixture of admiration and nervousness. They were skilled, confident, and experienced, but she reminded herself that her strength came from sincerity and passion. When her turn came, she walked onto the stage, her fingers lightly brushing over the polished surface of the piano. The audience hushed immediately, curious and expectant. She took a deep breath, closed her eyes for a moment, and allowed herself to center her thoughts. The first note sounded, clear and soft, filling the hall with a delicate energy. It was simple, yet it carried with it the weight of her confidence and her emotion. The music began to flow naturally. She moved from soft, tender passages to bold, expressive chords, letting her emotions guide her hands. Every note was intentional, every pause meaningful. The audience was captivated. Some leaned forward, others closed their eyes, and a few whispered softly to each other, sharing their wonder at what they were hearing. The music was alive, and she was no longer just playing. It was as if the piano and her soul had become one. As the piece continued, she began to improvise more boldly. The melodies shifted, combining gentle themes with dramatic sequences, flowing in ways she had never tried before. Each section told a story: hope, struggle, joy, and resilience. She felt completely immersed, unaware of time passing, completely absorbed in the music and the connection she was creating with her audience. Every reaction from the listeners fueled her confidence and inspired her to explore new heights of expression. Midway through, she reached a passage that was both delicate and intricate. Her fingers moved quickly but gracefully over the keys, creating harmonies that were complex yet perfectly balanced. The audience responded instinctively. Some gasped softly, others leaned in, mesmerized. She realized that the power of music was not just in technical skill, but in emotion and authenticity. The more honest and personal the music, the deeper the connection with those listening. Then she transitioned into a section that was energetic and playful. The piano seemed to dance beneath her fingers, bright and sparkling. The audience smiled, laughed quietly, and clapped along softly, caught up in the rhythm and joy of the music. She felt a thrill, the realization that she could make people feel happiness and delight simply through the notes she created. Music was no longer just her own expression. It was a shared experience, a language connecting hearts and minds. As the performance neared its climax, she allowed herself to take risks she had never dared before. She combined fast arpeggios with soft, lingering chords, blending contrasts to create tension and release. Her hands moved with confidence, precision, and freedom. The audience was completely absorbed, caught in the journey of sound she had crafted. Some were leaning forward, eyes wide with admiration. Others sat quietly, tears glistening in their eyes, experiencing emotions that words could not convey. Finally, she reached the last sequence of the piece. It was a section she had composed herself, a melody that held the essence of all her experiences, the nervousness of her first performance, the joy of connecting with audiences, the courage to share herself fully. Her fingers traced the keys deliberately, letting the music build and swell. Each note was deliberate, each chord deliberate, each pause meaningful. The hall was filled with the resonance of sound and emotion. She pressed the final note firmly and allowed it to linger, fading slowly into silence. For a brief moment, no one moved. The audience seemed suspended, as if holding onto the last echo of her music, not wanting it to end. Then slowly the applause began. At first, soft, then louder, until the entire auditorium erupted in cheers. People were standing, clapping, and shouting their admiration. Some wiped tears from their eyes, others smiled in quiet wonder. She sat back, feeling warmth, relief, and a deep sense of fulfillment. Afterwards, people rushed to congratulate her. Musicians, teachers, festival organizers, and even strangers approached her with wide eyes and excited voices. They praised her technique, her emotion, and the way she had turned the piano into a storyteller. She answered politely, humbly explaining that she had practiced for years and that her love for music had guided her. But she realized that what truly mattered was the connection she had created. The way her music had touched hearts, inspired smiles, and stirred emotions. The organizer of the festival approached her, beaming. "You've done something extraordinary today," they said. "Not just technically, but emotionally. Everyone here is talking about it. You didn't just perform. You gave people an experience they will never forget." She smiled quietly, feeling a sense of satisfaction she had never known. It wasn't just applause or recognition. It was the understanding that she had shared a piece of herself, and that it had mattered to others. Over the next few days, messages and invitations poured in. People wanted her to perform at schools, community events, and local concerts. Some asked for lessons, curious about how she had learned to combine skill with emotion so naturally. She realized that her music had begun to inspire others, to give them courage to explore their own talents and passions. She began to see her gift as more than personal enjoyment. It was a way to positively impact the lives of others. Even in quiet moments at home, she felt a transformation. She would sit at the piano, recalling her performances, experimenting with new melodies, and letting her fingers create freely. She found joy in discovering new harmonies, in blending emotions into her music, and in understanding that her talent was not just for herself. It was a gift to share. Each day, she grew more confident, more expressive, and more connected to the music and to herself. Her family noticed the change. They could see the confidence, the poise, and the deep joy in her eyes. They supported her gently, encouraging her to keep sharing her music while staying grounded. They reminded her that her greatest power was in authenticity, in playing from the heart, and she listened carefully, understanding that her success was not just in skill, but in sincerity. Through it all, she never forgot the small note she had been asked to play at the very beginning. That simple request had opened a door that led to growth, discovery, and opportunity. It reminded her that sometimes the smallest beginnings could lead to extraordinary outcomes. Every performance since then had been a step along a path she had never imagined, a journey of self-discovery, courage, and connection. Eventually, she realized that her music had become more than just performances. It was a way to communicate, inspire, and create lasting impressions. Even brief encounters, playing at a school assembly, a local gathering, or a small community hall, could have a profound effect. She understood that her responsibility as a musician was not just to master the notes, but to reach the hearts of her audience, to create meaning, and to give joy. The young woman also began mentoring younger students who were curious about music. She shared her experiences, her approach to improvisation, and the importance of playing with emotion. She encouraged them to explore their own styles and to trust their instincts. She realized that her talent could multiply, not just through her performances, but through inspiring others to find their own voices. As the months continued, she performed more often, each time experimenting, growing, and connecting. She was invited to larger venues, collaborative concerts, and community events. And yet, no matter the size of the audience, she approached every performance with the same sincerity and passion. Music had become a language she could speak fluently, a way to express the things she felt deeply without saying a single word. Through all her experiences, she understood a simple truth. Talent could open doors, but courage, passion, and authenticity were what made music truly unforgettable. She had been asked for a simple note, and she had delivered something far beyond expectation. That moment had changed everything, her confidence, her path, and the way she saw her own potential. And in the end, she realized that the greatest reward was not applause, recognition, or fame. The true gift was the connection she had created through her music. Every smile, every tear, every moment of awe in her audience had reminded her that her talent was not hers alone. It was a bridge, a gift to share, and a way to touch lives in ways words could never achieve. The journey that began with a single note had led her to discover herself, to inspire others, and to understand the transformative power of music. And as she sat at her piano, ready to play again, she knew that her story was only just beginning, because every note, every melody, and every performance held the potential to change the world, one listener at a time.